The penthouse windows exploded outward in a shower of glass and flame, raining down on Madison Avenue like deadly confetti. 20 stories below, firefighters rushed through the building's marble lobby while smoke billowed. From the top floor, black clouds that carried more than just the smell of burning luxury. They carried secrets worth killing for. "Get back, everyone get back," Captain Rodriguez shouted, his voice barely cutting through the chaos of sirens and screaming residents. The Meridian Tower, home to Manhattan's wealthiest elite, had never seen anything like this. Neither had the man watching from across the street, his designer suit wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his heart shattered into pieces sharper than the glass littering the pavement. Cole Blackwood pressed his palm against the police car window, leaving a smudge on the bulletproof glass. Handcuffs bit into his wrists, 18-karat gold watch on one arm, cold steel on the other. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3 hours ago, he'd been planning his wedding. Now he was watching his world burn, literally, while the woman he loved was somewhere in that inferno. "She's still up there," he said, his voice raw. The detective beside him didn't respond, just kept writing in her notepad. They thought he'd done this. They thought he'd set the fire that was consuming everything he'd built, everything he'd hidden, everything he'd lied about for the past year. The truth was so much worse. Welcome to another heart-stopping story from Rich Billionaires Romance Stories, where love and betrayal dance on the edge of disaster. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when a billionaire's carefully constructed lies come crashing down in flames. And if you're one of our returning viewers, you already know we're about to take you on a ride that'll leave you breathless. Have you ever built your entire life on a foundation of half-truths, only to watch it crumble in a single night? Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you'd rather see everything burn than tell them who you really were? That's exactly where Cole Blackwood found himself as Manhattan's finest fought to save the penthouse that held not just priceless art and million-dollar furniture, but evidence that would destroy 3 lives forever. The fire had started at 9:47 p.m. By 9:52, the first responders were on scene. By 10:15, Cole was in custody. But the real story, the one that would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the price of keeping secrets, had begun exactly 1 year earlier in this very building, when a chance encounter in a broken elevator changed everything. Tonight's tale isn't just about a fire that consumed a $40 million penthouse. It's about the slow burn of deception that led to this moment, about choices made in shadow that exploded into light, about a love so powerful it survived betrayal but couldn't survive the truth. As another window shattered above, sending a fresh cascade of flames into the night sky, Cole closed his eyes and remembered her face when she'd found the documents. The way her hands had trembled, the way she'd looked at him like he was a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe he always had been. "Tell me something," the detective finally spoke, her pen poised above the paper. "Was any of it real?" Cole opened his eyes, watching the firefighters aim their hoses at windows that had once framed his perfect view of Central Park. "Every lie I told her was real," he said. "That's the part that's going to destroy us all." The building groaned, and somewhere in that inferno was the answer to everything, if it survived the flames. But first, let me take you back to where this all began. 1 year earlier, the Meridian Tower penthouse gleamed under crystal chandeliers, a world away from the flames that would eventually consume it. Cole Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread beneath him like a glittering chessboard where he'd already captured the king. At 35, he controlled a real estate empire worth $3 billion, owned properties from Dubai to London, and had just closed the deal that would put his name on the city's next iconic skyscraper. The Teterboro crew just confirmed, the jet's ready for Monaco tomorrow. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Push it to Saturday," Cole replied, without turning from the view. Celine mentioned wanting to see the Rothko exhibit at MoMA first. That was Cole then, rearranging international flights for his wife's art interests, building his empire around her smile. The penthouse reflected their life together, his sharp minimalism softened by her touches of warmth. Fresh orchids on every surface because she loved them. A library filled with first editions because she collected them. A temperature-controlled wine cellar stocked with vintages from the year they met. Celine Blackwood entered the room like sunrise breaking through storm clouds, her presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. Where Cole was all sharp angles and calculated moves, she brought grace and authenticity. The emerald dress she wore had cost more than most people's cars, but she moved in it like she was wearing jeans and his old Columbia sweatshirt, which she often did on Sunday mornings. "The hospital board wants us at the gala next week," she said, kissing his cheek. "I already RSVP'd, yes." "Whatever you want," he murmured, pulling her close. Back then, he meant it. Their life was a carefully choreographed dance of charity galas, business dinners, and stolen moments between board meetings. Private jets to Paris for her birthday. Helicopter rides to the Hamptons just because the sunset looked promising. A lifestyle that Instagram influencers would kill for, but built on something real, or so they both believed. The change started subtly, like hairline fractures in expensive marble. Cole began staying later at the office, his quick meetings stretching into midnight strategy sessions. The man who once left billion-dollar negotiations early to make their dinner reservations now sent apology texts with increasing frequency. "Another late night?" Celine asked one evening, finding him in his study at 3 a.m., surrounded by contracts and empty coffee cups. The Manhattan skyline glowed behind him, but his eyes were fixed on spreadsheets. "The Singapore deal won't close itself," he said without looking up. "This could add another billion to our portfolio." Our portfolio. When did it become about money? Celine remembered when he used to say our future, our dreams, our life together. Now everything was measured in market value and profit margins. The validation he once sought in her eyes, he now found in Forbes headlines and Wall Street Journal profiles. Each new acquisition fed his hunger for more power, more recognition, more proof that the kid from Queens who'd started with nothing had become somebody. The penthouse filled with awards and accolades, but the space between them on their California king bed grew wider. "I miss you," she told him one morning, catching him between his workout and his first conference call. "I'm right here," he replied, but his attention was already on his phone, scrolling through overnight market reports from Tokyo. She watched him disappear into the elevator, his Armani suit perfect, his focus absolute, just not on her. The man who'd once spent hours learning about Impressionist art just to understand. Her passion now couldn't remember the last museum they'd visited together. The husband, who'd written her love notes on Hermes stationery, now communicated primarily through his assistant's scheduling emails. Success had become his mistress, demanding more attention than any human rival could. Board meetings replaced date nights. Acquisition strategies consumed conversations that once ranged from philosophy to their shared dreams of starting a family. The empire grew, but their marriage shrank, compressed into scheduled moments between hostile takeovers and international expansions. Celine found herself alone in rooms full of people, married to a man whose body was present but whose mind lived in tomorrow's deals, next quarter's projections, and the endless pursuit of more. But it hadn't always been this way. 5 years earlier, before the billions, before the penthouse, before Cole, became a name whispered reverently in boardrooms. There had been just them. The memory hit Celine unexpectedly one evening as she dined alone again, their wedding photo catching the light. That photo, taken not at their lavish Plaza Hotel reception, but in the quiet moment. Afterward, on the hotel roof, Manhattan sparkling below them like a promise. "Dance with me," he'd said, pulling her close despite the lack of music. "Cole, will ruin my dress on this gravel," she'd laughed, but she was already in his arms. "Then I'll buy you 1,000 more," he'd whispered. "But right now, I just want to hold my wife under these stars." They'd swayed together, her Vera Wang train indeed catching on the rooftop's rough surface. His rented tux, he couldn't afford designer then, wrinkled from a day of celebration. But in that moment, with the city as their witness and their whole future stretching ahead, they'd been complete. He used to cook for her, badly, but with enthusiasm. Sunday mornings in their tiny Upper West Side apartment, attempting French toast, while she read him passages from whatever novel had captured her attention. He'd burn the bread, she'd laugh, and they'd end up ordering bagels from the corner deli, eating them in bed while planning their someday life. "When I make my first million," he'd say, syrup dripping on their sheets, "I'm going to buy you that brownstone you love on 74th Street. "I don't need a brownstone," she'd always reply. "I just need you." He'd been romantic in ways that money couldn't buy. Handwritten letters slipped into her work bag. Surprise picnics in Central Park with wine hidden in coffee thermoses. Once, when she'd had the flu, he'd sat on their bathroom floor for hours, reading her favorite poetry, while she soaked in the tub, his voice turning Neruda into medicine. The contrast hit hard. That man, the one who'd stayed up all night helping her prepare for her master's defense, who'd celebrated her acceptance to Columbia's art history program with more joy than his own first major deal. Where had he gone? When did the husband who memorized her coffee order, oat milk cappuccino, extra foam, cinnamon not cocoa, become someone whose assistant sent flowers with generic cards? Their love had been built on presence, on attention, on the thousand small ways they'd chosen each other daily. Now she sat in a penthouse worth $40 million, wearing diamonds that could fund a small country. His budget, feeling poorer than she'd ever been in that cramped apartment where love had paid the rent. Cara Devine entered Cole Blackwood's life the way a match enters gasoline. With immediate combustion disguised as professional necessity, she walked into his corner office on a Tuesday afternoon in March when the spring rain painted Manhattan in shades of gray, and Celine was in Boston visiting her mother. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm here to make you unforgettable," she announced, setting her portfolio on his desk with manicured fingers that had never known a wedding ring. At 28, Cara had built a reputation for transforming wealthy nobodies into media darlings. She dressed like success was her birthright, Louboutin heels that added unnecessary inches to her already commanding height, suits tailored to showcase every curve, and confidence that filled rooms before she even spoke. Her blonde hair fell in calculated waves, and her smile promised secrets worth knowing. "My current PR team seems to be doing fine," Cole said, barely glancing up from his monitors. "Fine doesn't get you the Wall Street Journal cover story. Fine doesn't make you the face of American success." She leaned against his desk, close enough that her perfume, something French and deliberately memorable, invaded his space. "I don't do fine, Mr. Blackwood. I am legendary." She represented everything Cole's ambition craved: recognition, admiration, the intoxicating rush of being seen as more than just another billionaire. Where Celine grounded him in authenticity, Cara offered elevation into mythology. She spoke his new language fluently: market domination, brand expansion, legacy building. "Your wife is lovely," Cara mentioned during their second meeting, glancing at the silver-framed photo on his desk. "Very understated. That works for some men, but you're not some men, are you?" The comment lodged itself in Cole's mind like a splinter. Celine was understated. She preferred intimate gatherings to grand galas, chose philanthropy over publicity, and valued privacy over performance. Once, he'd loved that about her. Now, with Cara painting visions of magazine covers and documentary features, understated felt like another word for invisible. "I can make you the most recognized name in real estate," Cara promised. Her presentation slides reflecting off the conference room windows. "But it requires total commitment. Late nights, weekend strategies, complete trust between us." Cole signed her contract that afternoon. Celine was at her weekly museum volunteer shift, surrounded by art and purpose, unaware that her husband had just invited a very different kind of beauty into their life. Cara's firm would handle all of Blackwood Industries' public relations, but her real project, reshaping Cole into the man his ego demanded he become, had already begun. The first press release went out that week: Cole Blackwood, the billionaire redefining Manhattan's skyline. Cara's phone number was now in his favorites, right below Celine's, a proximity that would prove prophetic. The transformation from professional to personal happened in increments small enough to deny, large enough to matter. First came the working dinners, necessary evils Cara called them, to discuss strategy away from office distractions. "The Times photographer needs you at 11 Madison Park tomorrow night," Cara informed him during a Thursday afternoon meeting. "Power dinner profile piece. Very exclusive. I have plans with Celine tomorrow," Cole said, though even as the words left his mouth, he was already calculating how to reschedule. "Cancel them." Cara's tone was matter-of-fact. "This is the kind of exposure money can't buy. Besides, won't your wife understand? This is for your future, their future." But somehow Celine wasn't invited to these dinners that shaped it. The first dinner was genuinely professional. Discussions of media angles over Wagyu beef and wine. Cole pretended to understand. The second included casual touches, her hand on his arm to emphasize a point, fingers brushing as she passed him documents. By the third, fourth, fifth dinner, the pretense had worn thin as restaurant napkins. "You're different from your public persona," Kara observed one evening at Daniel, her second martini making her bold. "There's something darker under all that polish." "I like it." "You don't know me," Cole replied, but he didn't move when she leaned closer. "I know you're bored. I know you feel trapped in a life that's too small for your ambitions." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I know you look at your wife and see the past, not the future." The words were cruel, manipulative, and absolutely effective. Cole found himself sharing things with Kara he'd never told anyone. His father's bankruptcy, his fear of returning to poverty, his desperate need to matter in ways that couldn't be measured in bank statements alone. "Celine doesn't understand that hunger," Kara said during another late dinner, this time at a private club where discretion was part of the membership fee. "She was born comfortable. She can afford to care about art and charity because she's never been nobody." The dinners evolved into drinks at her Tribeca apartment to review press materials officially. Her place was all glass and steel, views of the Hudson, and art that cost more than most annual salaries. Everything about it screamed success, ambition, arrival. "One more drink?" she'd offer, already pouring. "We're almost done with the Forbes interview prep." But they were never really preparing for interviews. They were building a different kind of intimacy, one based on shared hunger, mutual ambition, and the dangerous chemistry of two people who saw in each other a reflection of their darkest desires. Cole told himself it was nothing. Just business. Just strategy. Just two professionals working toward a common goal. Even as their meetings moved later, their conversations became deeper, their proximity closer. Even as he started lying to Celine about where he was, who he was with, why he came home smelling like French perfume and possibility. "Your wife is lucky," Kara said one night, her hand resting on his knee, "to be loved by someone so dedicated." The irony burned, but not enough to make him leave. Not enough to stop the slow slide from professional to personal, to something that would destroy everything he claimed to value. In the reflection of Kara's apartment windows, Cole saw not the man who danced with Celine on a hotel rooftop, but the billionaire he'd always wanted to become, powerful, desired, and completely lost. Celine Blackwood had loved her husband long enough to know when something shifted in his rhythm. It started with details so minor anyone else would have missed them, the way he now placed his phone face down during dinner, how his goodnight kisses had become perfunctory pecks, the new password on his laptop he'd never needed before. "Who's Kara?" she asked one evening, holding up his jacket. A business card had fallen from the pocket. Kara Devine, Public Relations, with a handwritten note on the back. "Until next time, K, new PR strategist," Cole answered too quickly, taking the jacket. "She's handling the Times feature." Celine nodded, but something cold settled in her stomach. She knew all of Cole's business associates, and had met them at countless dinners and galas. Why hadn't she heard of this one? The perfume came next. Not her Chanel No. 5, but something younger, more aggressive, clinging to his shirts like evidence. She found herself doing things she'd never imagined, checking his collar for lipstick, scrolling through his credit card statements, noting the restaurant charges for two that happened on nights he'd claimed to be in board meetings. "You're working late again?" she asked one Thursday, watching him adjust his tie in their bedroom mirror. "The Singapore deal," he said, not meeting her eyes in the reflection, "should be wrapped up by 11, but the Singapore deal had closed 2 weeks ago. She knew because she'd sent champagne to his office to celebrate. The bottle still sat unopened on his desk. She'd seen it that morning when she'd surprised him with lunch, only to find his assistant awkwardly explaining he was in an off-site meeting. Small betrayals accumulated like snowflakes, each one insignificant until the weight threatened the avalanche. The way he smiled at his phone now, private and pleased. How he'd started working out obsessively, buying new cologne, caring about his appearance in ways that had nothing to do with her. The business trips that multiplied, the weekend conferences that hadn't existed before. "I love you," he still said each morning, but the words had become hollow, automatic. Like setting an alarm or locking the door, necessary habits stripped of meaning. Celine found herself becoming someone she didn't recognize, a woman who smelled his clothes, who drove past his office at night to see if his car was really there, who lay awake calculating the mathematics of betrayal. Twice she'd almost hired a private investigator, the business card hidden in her jewelry box like a shameful secret. But what hurt most wasn't the suspicion of physical betrayal. It was the emotional abandonment, the way he'd already left their marriage in every way that mattered. She'd become a beautiful fixture in his life, like the Monet in their foyer, expensive, prestigious, but ultimately just a background to his real existence. "Tell me about her," Celine said one night, surprising them both. "About who?" Cole asked, but his hesitation was confession enough. "Whoever she is, that's making you happy in ways I can't anymore." The silence that followed was louder than any admission, and in that moment, Celine knew her intuition hadn't lied. The only question now was whether their love was strong enough to survive the truth. What would you do if you suspected the person you love most was hiding betrayal? Would you confront them immediately, or wait for concrete proof? Comment your thoughts below. It helps me know I'm speaking to hearts that understand love's struggles. Your experiences and wisdom make these stories richer for everyone in our community. And if this story is touching something real in your life, remember, you're not alone. We're all here navigating the complicated waters of love, trust, and the courage to face hard truths. The Meridian Tower's private elevator had never felt longer than it did that April evening. Celine clutched the surprise she'd planned, Cole's favorite takeout from the hole-in-the-wall Thai place they'd discovered during their first year together, before Michelin stars became their standard. She'd decided spontaneity might bridge the growing distance between them, might remind him of simpler times when pad thai on their fire escape counted as a perfect date. The elevator opened directly into their penthouse, and immediately she knew something was wrong. Music drifted through the space, not Cole's usual classical or jazz, but something sultry and unfamiliar. Candles flickered throughout the living room, casting shadows that danced across surfaces where natural light should have been. Two voices carried from the terrace, Cole's familiar baritone mixed with feminine laughter that definitely wasn't coming from their housekeeper. Celine set the takeout bags on the marble counter, her hands steady despite the tremor building in her chest. Each step toward the terrace felt like crossing into foreign territory, even though she'd called this place home for 3 years. Through the French doors, she saw them. Cole stood at the railing, Manhattan glittering behind him, while Kara, Divine, occupied the space beside him that had always been Celine's. They weren't touching, not yet, but their bodies angled toward each other with an intimacy that transcended physical contact. Champagne flutes caught the candlelight, and Kara wore a dress that belonged in a bedroom, not a business meeting. "The view really is spectacular," Kara was saying, her voice carrying clearly through the glass. "I can see why you never want to leave." "Sometimes the most beautiful prisons are the hardest to escape," Cole replied, and the words hit Celine like physical blows. Prison. Is that what their home had become to him? She must have made a sound, a gasp, a sob, something, because both heads turned toward the doors. The champagne in Cole's hand trembled, sending golden ripples through the crystal. Kara's smile faltered, but didn't disappear entirely, as if she'd been expecting this moment, had perhaps even orchestrated it. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The city continued its restless existence below, taxis honking and lives continuing, oblivious to the marriage dissolving 40 floors above. Then Celine pushed open the doors, stepping into a scene that would replay in her nightmares for months to come. "Don't stop on my account," she said, her voice steadier than her heart. "I'd hate to interrupt your business meeting." The silence that followed was deafening, filled with everything that couldn't be said, and everything that didn't need to be. Cole's face cycled through emotions, surprise, guilt, defiance, and, finally, a resignation that hurt worse than all the others combined. "Celine," he started, setting down his champagne with careful precision. "I should go," Kara interjected, but she moved slowly, gathering her purse with deliberate calm. As she passed Celine, she paused. "He's an extraordinary man. You're lucky to have had him as long as you did." Had. Past tense. The word hung in the air like a verdict. After the elevator doors closed behind Kara, Celine and Cole stood facing each other across a distance that felt infinite despite being mere feet. The terrace that had hosted countless dinners, where they'd slowly danced under Stars and planned their future now felt like a stage set for endings. How long? Celine asked, though part of her didn't want to know. It's not what you think. How long? Each word dropped like a stone into still water. Cole ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing. Nothing physical has happened. We've just been. Emotional infidelity is still infidelity, Celine interrupted. Or did you forget that promise too? The reference to their wedding vows made him flinch. They'd written them together, sitting on their apartment floor with Chinese takeout and cheap wine, laughing at their attempts to capture forever in words. He'd promised to choose her every day, to build dreams together, to never let success change who they were to each other. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Cole said, his voice hardening. The expectations, the constant need to be more, achieve more. I've been right here. Celine's composure finally cracked. Through every deal, every victory, every setback. But somewhere along the way, you decided I wasn't enough anymore. That's not, isn't it? She moved to the railing where Kara had stood, gripping it until her knuckles went white. When did I become the prison you needed to escape from, Cole? When did our life become something to endure rather than enjoy? The city lights blurred through tears she refused to let fall. Behind her, she heard Cole pour himself another drink, scotch this time, she knew from the sound. They'd become strangers who knew each other's habits. I never meant for this to happen, he said quietly. Yes, you did. She turned to face him. Every dinner you chose with her over me, every lie about working late, every moment you invested in her instead of us, you meant all of it. You just didn't want to face the consequences. The man before her looked nothing like the one who'd danced with her on a hotel rooftop, who'd burned French toast while reading her poetry, who'd promised that success would only make their love stronger. This was someone she didn't recognize, polished and hollow as the awards lining his office walls. You want to talk about consequences? Cole's voice rose, alcohol and guilt making him cruel. How about the consequence of marrying someone who can't understand ambition? Who's content to waste her potential on volunteer work in art galleries while I'm building an empire? The words hung between them like a match struck in a room full of gasoline. Celine's hand moved before her mind could stop it, reaching for the nearest object, his champagne flute. She didn't throw it at him, just held it up to the light, watching bubbles rise and burst like tiny dreams. This is what we've become, she said softly. Expensive champagne and empty promises. She let the glass fall, not thrown, just released, and it shattered on the terrace tiles with a sound like breaking hearts. Cole stepped back, his shoe crunching on crystal shards, and knocked into the side table. The candle wobbled, its flame dancing dangerously close to the silk curtains that billowed in the evening breeze. Careful, Celine started, but Cole was already turning, his movements sharp with anger and alcohol. Don't tell me to be careful. I built all of this, every square inch, every... His gesture was too wide, too wild. His hand caught the candelabra, sending it toppling. Time slowed as they watched the candles roll across the terrace, flames licking at the outdoor cushions, catching the edge of the curtains that led inside. For a moment, they both stood frozen, watching their life together catch fire in the most literal way possible. The flames spread faster than seemed possible, feeding on expensive fabrics and broken dreams. The curtains became torches, carrying destruction inside where more candles waited like accomplices. The fire extinguisher, Cole said, but his words were lost in the sudden roar of flames meeting the indoor draperies. Celine backed away, not from the fire, but from him, from them, from everything they'd become. The penthouse filled with smoke and heat, but she felt cold, watching their home burn with the same detachment she'd felt watching their marriage crumble. We should go. Cole reached for her, but she stepped away from his touch. Yes, she agreed, moving toward the elevator. We should have left a long time ago. Behind them, the fire found new fuel, papers from his home office, the wooden frame of their wedding portrait, the silk flowers she'd arranged that morning in a futile attempt to make their house feel like home again. The smoke alarm screamed, but they were just noise added to the chaos of everything else falling apart. As the elevator doors closed, Celine took one last look at the penthouse, at the flames consuming evidence of their life together, at Cole's face painted in orange light and shadow, at the ending neither of them had seen coming but both had helped create. The building's fire suppression system activated, water raining down like tears. The universe was crying for them, But some fires, once started, were impossible to extinguish. The flames moved through the penthouse like liquid gold, consuming everything in their path with an appetite that seemed almost personal. What had started as scattered candles on the terrace now roared through $40 million of luxury with democratic hunger. Silk curtains became torches, Persian rugs transformed into rivers of fire, and the Monet in the foyer curled and blackened as if the water lilies were drowning in heat. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through radio static as his team stormed the Meridian Tower's marble lobby. 20 floors, full evacuation protocol. We've got reports of people still inside. The building's sprinkler system fought a losing battle against flames. That had found perfect fuel in the penthouse's opulent materials. Water cascaded from the ceiling in silver sheets, but the fire had already claimed the living room, reaching hungry fingers toward the library, where first-edition books became kindling worth more than most people's homes. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the flames painted Manhattan in hellish orange light. The penthouse had become a beacon visible from Central Park, a 40-story high funeral pyre for a marriage that had died long before the first spark caught. Firefighters burst through the stairwell doors, their heavy boots echoing against marble floors now slick with water and ash. The elevator shaft had become a chimney, drawing flames upward with terrifying efficiency. Smoke billowed through the building's ventilation system, setting off alarms on every floor and sending residents streaming into the streets below. Primary search, East Wing, Rodriguez shouted over the roar. Reports of 3 civilians, 2 confirmed out, 1 unaccounted for. The heat was overwhelming, even through their protective gear. The penthouse's open floor plan, designed to showcase wealth and space, now worked against them, allowing the fire to spread unchecked across vast expanses. Artwork worth millions became fuel. Designer furniture transformed into accelerants, and the wine cellar, its temperature-controlled environment, created its own inferno as bottles exploded like grenades. Outside, news helicopters circled like vultures, their cameras capturing every moment of destruction. The Blackwood penthouse fire would lead tomorrow's headlines, but tonight, it was just another emergency for the men and women charging into the smoke, searching for anyone who might still be trapped in the wreckage of what had once been someone's dream home. 20 stories below, Madison Avenue had transformed into a theater of public humiliation. Residents of the Meridian Tower, clustered on the sidewalk in their designer pajamas and hastily thrown on robes, their faces tilted upward toward the spectacle, consuming the building's crown jewel. "Isn't that the Blackwood penthouse?" whispered Mrs. Chen from the 18th floor, her phone already recording. "The billionaire real estate man?" Social media erupted faster than the flames themselves. Instagram stories captured the fire from every angle, Twitter buzzed with speculation, and TikTok videos spread the news to millions before the first news van arrived. Blackwood fire began trending within minutes, accompanied by photos of Cole and Celine from charity galas and society pages. The paparazzi materialized like smoke, their cameras clicking with mechanical hunger. They'd been following Cole's rising profile for months, documenting his transformation from successful businessman to media darling. Now they had their biggest story yet, the literal and figurative burning of a billionaire's empire. "Cole Blackwood, can you comment on the fire?" shouted a reporter, thrusting a microphone toward where Cole stood beside a police car, his designer suit wrinkled and ash-stained. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. This was the man who'd courted publicity, who'd hired Kara specifically to make him famous. Now he had the attention he'd craved, but for all the wrong reasons. The carefully crafted image of success and sophistication was literally going up in smoke. Broadcasts lived to a city that loved watching the powerful fall. Neighbors who'd envied the Blackwoods' lifestyle now watched with mixture of schadenfreude and genuine concern. The building's concierge fielded calls from reporters offering money for exclusive details, while security guards struggled to maintain a perimeter against the growing crowd of onlookers drawn by the spectacle of wealth in flames. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. Billionaire's penthouse burns, love triangle leads to inferno, when money can't buy safety. Through the chaos and smoke, Celine heard something that made her blood freeze. A woman's scream from the direction of the service elevator. While the main elevator had been shut down, the smaller service lift was still operational and someone was trapped inside as smoke filled the shaft. "Kara," Cole breathed, recognizing the voice. Without hesitation, Celine pushed past the firefighters trying to evacuate her. "She's in the service elevator. It's stuck between floors." "Ma'am, you need to evacuate now," Captain Rodriguez commanded, but Celine was already moving. "I know this building better than anyone," she called back, grabbing a wet towel from the kitchen. "That elevator has a manual override. I can reach it." The service corridor was a tunnel of heat and smoke, but Celine pressed forward, guided by Kara's increasingly desperate cries. The woman who had stolen her husband's heart was trapped like a bird in a cage, and every instinct Celine possessed screamed at her to save her. She found the manual controls behind a panel she'd seen maintenance workers use countless times. Her hands shook as she worked the mechanism, smoke burning her lungs, heat searing her skin. The elevator lurched, groaned, then slowly began its descent. When the doors opened, Kara collapsed into Celine's arms, sobbing and gasping. For a moment, they were just two women facing death together, all betrayals, and rivalries stripped away by the fundamental human need to survive. "Why?" Kara whispered, as Celine helped her toward the stairwell. "Why did you save me?" Celine looked at the woman who had helped destroy her marriage, whose ambition had fed Cole's ego until it consumed everything good between them. In that moment, she could have chosen revenge, could have let the fire claim the architect of her heartbreak. Instead, she chose grace. "Because that's who I am," Celine said simply. "And I won't let you change that." As they reached the stairwell, firefighters took over, carrying Kara to safety while Celine followed, her moral dignity intact despite everything that had been taken from her. She had lost her husband, her home, her marriage, but she had kept her soul. If you're glued to this moment as the penthouse burns, hit like on this video. It tells me you want me to keep bringing you stories full of passion, wealth, betrayal, and unexpected redemption. These tales of love tested by fire, literally and figuratively, resonate because they show us who we really are when everything else burns away. Your likes and engagement help me know these stories are touching something real in your hearts, and that means everything to a storyteller like me. The red and blue emergency lights painted the sidewalk in alternating waves of color, transforming Madison Avenue into a surreal theater where three lives sat wrapped in identical gray rescue blankets. From a distance, they might have looked like equals, three survivors of the same disaster, united by shared trauma. Up close, the differences were stark as the smoke still rising from the building above. Cole sat on the ambulance bumper, his Armani suit torn and stained, his usually perfect hair disheveled with ash. The man who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals now stared at his hands like he'd never seen them before. Paramedics had checked him for smoke inhalation, pronounced him physically fine, but something in his eyes suggested deeper damage. Kara occupied a folding chair 20 feet away, her designer dress ruined, her carefully styled hair hanging in damp strands around her face. She clutched her phone with white knuckles, already fielding calls from reporters who'd somehow gotten her number. Her PR instincts remained intact, even in crisis. She was already crafting the narrative, positioning herself as an innocent victim rather than a catalyst. Celine stood apart from both of them, declining the paramedic's suggestion to sit. Her rescue blanket hung around her shoulders like a cape, and despite the soot on her clothes and the exhaustion in her posture, she maintained a dignity that the fire couldn't touch. She watched the firefighters work, watched her life literally go up in smoke, but her spine remained straight. The three of them formed a triangle of destruction: the husband who'd lost his way, the other woman who'd helped him lose it, and the wife who'd found her strength in the ashes of everything she'd thought she wanted. They shared the same air, the same emergency lighting, the same disaster. But they were already living in completely different worlds. "Mr. Blackwood, we'll need a statement for the insurance investigation," Detective Martinez said, approaching with a notepad that seemed absurdly small, given the magnitude of what had just burned. Cole looked up slowly, as if the words were reaching him through water. "Insurance," he repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. For the first time in his adult life, money felt meaningless. The penthouse had been worth $40 million, but what was the price of a marriage? The art collection had been insured for 8 figures. But how do you calculate the value of trust? His wine cellar had contained bottles worth more than most people's cars. But what was the cost of choosing ambition over love? The building's structure is sound, the fire chief reported to the assembled residents. Damage is contained to the 20th floor. You'll be able to return to your units by morning. Everyone except Cole. He had no unit to return to, no home to rebuild. The penthouse was a blackened shell, and even if insurance covered the financial loss, how do you replace a life? The Monet was gone, but more importantly, so were the handwritten love letters Celine had saved from their early years. The first edition books could be rebought, but not the marginalia they'd written to each other in the pages. His phone buzzed constantly. Board members, investors, reporters, all wanting to know how this would affect Blackwood Industries. The company would survive. It was bigger than one man's personal disasters. But Cole felt smaller than he had since his father's bankruptcy, reduced to a figure in a rescue blanket, watching his empire's crown jewels smolder. "Sir?" Detective Martinez prompted. "The statement?" Cole tried to find words that could explain how a marriage had become a fire, how success had become failure, how the man who'd built skyscrapers couldn't construct a simple apology. But language felt inadequate, like trying to describe color to someone who'd never seen light. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, and for a billionaire who'd made his fortune with words, contracts, negotiations, deals, the confession felt like the most honest thing he'd said in months. Celine approached Cole as the last fire truck prepared to leave, her footsteps steady on the wet pavement. The rescue blanket had slipped from her shoulders, and she looked smaller without it, but somehow stronger too, like she'd shed more than just emergency covering. "We need to talk," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the diminishing chaos. Cole stood, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since the flames had started. "Celine, I know this looks... I can't save a man who keeps burning the bridge between us," she interrupted, her words precise as surgical instruments. The metaphor hit harder than any accusation. Cole had literally burned their home, but metaphorically, he'd been setting fires for months. Small blazes of deception, betrayal, and neglect that had finally consumed everything. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, gesturing helplessly at the building behind them. "Yes, you did." Celine's voice remained steady, but tears finally began to fall. Maybe not the fire, but everything that led to it. Every dinner with her, every lie about working late, every moment you chose, building your image over building our marriage, you meant all of it. She pulled her wedding ring from her finger, the diamond catching the streetlight one last time. For a moment, she held it between them, this symbol of promises made. On a hotel rooftop, when they'd believed love could conquer anything. "I'm filing for separation tomorrow," she said, placing the ring in his palm. "Not because of tonight, but because of all the nights before tonight when you chose to be somewhere else." Cole closed his fingers around the ring, but it felt cold, lifeless, just expensive metal and stone, stripped of the meaning they'd once given it. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Somewhere you can't burn down," she replied. Cara Devine gathered her things with the efficiency of someone accustomed to quick exits. Her phone had been ringing non-stop, reporters, clients, damage control specialists all wanting to know how the city's hottest PR strategist had ended up trapped in a burning building with a married billionaire. "This was a business meeting," she told the third reporter who'd managed to get through. "Mr. Blackwood is a valued client, nothing more." But her voice lacked its usual conviction. The woman who'd built a career on crafting narratives couldn't seem to find one that made her look good in this situation. She was the other woman in a very public marital disaster, the catalyst for a fire that had made international news. She approached Cole one final time, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. "I'll handle the media fallout," she said. "All business, despite her ruined appearance. Spin it as a tragic accident. Keep your name clean." Cole looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time, not the glamorous strategist who did promise to make him legendary, but a woman whose ambition was as hollow as his had become. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't clean this up, let it be what it is." Cara's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's career suicide. Maybe some careers deserve to die." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked away, her phone already pressed to her ear, moving on to the next client, the next opportunity, the next man whose ego needed feeding. She disappeared into the crowd of onlookers, Just another face in the chaos, her role in this destruction already becoming yesterday's news in her mind. 3 months later, Celine Blackwood, now Celine Morrison again, stood in the doorway of a small loft apartment overlooking Central Park. The space was a fraction of the penthouse's size, with exposed brick walls, creaky hardwood floors, and windows that actually opened to let in real air instead of climate-controlled perfection. She'd bought it with money from her own trust fund, the inheritance she'd never touched during her marriage because Cole's wealth had made it seem unnecessary. Now it felt like salvation, proof that she could stand on her own, that her worth wasn't measured in square footage or designer labels. The apartment came furnished with essentials: a bed, a small dining table, a couch that had seen better decades. But Celine had added her own touches: books rescued from storage, photographs from before her marriage, and a small desk positioned by the window where morning light streamed in like a possibility. She'd returned to writing, the career she'd abandoned when Cole's success had made her own ambitions seem small by comparison. Her laptop sat open on the desk, cursor blinking on a half-finished article about art therapy for trauma survivors. The words came slowly but honestly, each sentence a small act of rebuilding. The divorce proceedings moved forward with surprising civility. Cole hadn't contested anything, had signed papers with the same resignation he'd shown that night on the sidewalk. He'd kept the business, the remaining properties, the empire he'd built. She'd kept herself. From her window, she could see joggers in the park, families feeding ducks at the pond, couples walking hand in hand without the weight of billion-dollar expectations. Life moved at human speed here, measured in moments rather than market reports. Her phone buzzed, a text from her editor accepting her latest piece. Small victories, but they belonged entirely to her. She was learning to build a life that couldn't burn down, because it was made of things that mattered: words, purpose, and the quiet strength that comes from choosing yourself when everyone else has given up on you. 2 years after the fire, Cole Blackwood sat in a therapist's office that cost more per hour than most people made in a week, but for the first time in his life, money felt like the least important thing in the room. Dr. Sarah Chen had been recommended by his lawyer, who'd grown tired of watching his most successful client self-destruct in slow motion. "Tell me about the letters," Dr. Chen said, her voice gentle but persistent. Cole reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a stack of handwritten pages, dozens of letters he'd written to Celine but never sent. They'd become a ritual, a way of processing the wreckage he'd made of the best thing in his life. "I write to her every week," he admitted, "about what I've learned, what I wish I'd done differently, how sorry I am. But I never send them because, what's the point? Some damage can't be undone." The letters chronicled his slow awakening to truths he'd spent years avoiding. How success had become his drug of choice, how he'd confused achievement with worth, how he'd traded the woman who loved him for the validation of strangers. Each page was an archaeology of regret, digging deeper into the man he'd become and the boy he'd once been. "I grew up poor," he told Dr. Chen during one session. "Really poor, the kind where you wear the same shoes until they fall apart, where dinner sometimes meant whatever was left in the pantry. I swore I'd never be that vulnerable again." But vulnerability, he was learning, wasn't about money. It was about letting people see you, really see you, without the armor of accomplishments and acquisitions. Celine had seen him that way once, and had loved the man beneath the ambition. He'd thrown that away for the approval of people who didn't even know his middle name. The therapy sessions were brutal, forcing him to confront the narcissism that had masqueraded as confidence, the insecurity that had driven him to seek validation in all the wrong places. He'd built an empire but lost his soul somewhere in the blueprints. "What would you say to her if you could, Doctor?" Chen asked. Cole looked out the window at Manhattan, the city he'd conquered, but that had somehow conquered him in return. "That I finally understand the difference between being successful and being worthy of love. And that I'm sorry it took losing her to learn it." The penthouse had been rebuilt, more luxurious than before, but Cole rarely spent time there. The new space felt like a museum of his mistakes, beautiful, expensive, and completely empty of the warmth that had once made it home. Every room echoed with the absence of the woman who'd made wealth feel worthwhile. He'd learned the hardest lesson money could teach: it amplifies who you already are, but it doesn't transform you into someone better. The billions in his accounts couldn't buy back a single morning of waking up next to Celine, couldn't purchase the sound of her laughter over coffee, couldn't acquire the feeling of being loved for who he was, rather than what he owned. "Money is a tool," he wrote in one of his unsent letters. "I treated it like a destination. I thought if I accumulated enough, achieved enough, built enough, I'd finally be enough. But enough for what? For whom? I had everything I thought I wanted, and nothing I actually needed." The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd hired Kara to make him famous, to transform his wealth into recognition, only to discover that fame was just another form of emptiness. The magazine covers and newspaper profiles had fed his ego, but starved his soul. He'd become a character in his own life story, playing the role of the successful billionaire, while the real Cole, the one who'd once burned French toast and read poetry, slowly disappeared. True love, he realized, required presence, not presence. It demanded attention, not acquisition. Celine had never cared about his net worth. She'd cared about his heart's worth. She'd loved him when he was building his first million, and she would have loved him if he'd lost it all, but only if he'd remained the man she'd fallen for. The wealthy men in his circle often joked about their wives being expensive, but Cole now understood the real cost wasn't financial. The price of love was vulnerability, consistency, and the daily choice to prioritize relationships over recognition. He'd been too cheap to pay it, and now he was bankrupt in the ways that actually mattered. In therapy, Cole came to understand that he hadn't just cheated on Celine with Kara. He'd been cheating on their marriage for months with his ambition, his ego, his relentless pursuit of more. The affair was just the final symptom of a disease that had been eating away at their relationship long before another woman entered the picture. "Neglect is insidious," Dr. Chen explained during one particularly difficult session. "It doesn't announce itself like betrayal does. It creeps in quietly, one missed dinner at a time, one distracted conversation at a time, one choice to prioritize work over love at a time." Cole thought about all the moments he'd been physically present but emotionally absent, sitting across from Celine at dinner while mentally reviewing contracts, lying beside her in bed while calculating tomorrow's deals, standing next to her at galas while networking with potential clients. His body had been there, but his heart had been elsewhere. "I thought providing for her was the same as loving her," he wrote in another letter. "I thought the penthouse, the jewelry, and the lifestyle were expressions of my devotion. But love isn't a bank account you fill up and then ignore. It's a garden that dies without daily tending." The cruelest part was that Celine had tried to tell him. She'd asked for his attention, his presence, his participation in their life together. But he'd been too busy building his empire to notice his marriage crumbling. He'd treated her concerns as interruptions, rather than invitations to reconnect. Absence, he realized, was honest. When someone wasn't there, you knew where you stood. But neglect was a special kind of torture. Being married to someone who was there, but not really there. Loved by someone who'd forgotten how to show it. Chosen by someone who kept choosing everything else first. The truth, Cole learned, has a way of surfacing like oil on water. No matter how deep you bury it, it eventually rises to the top. Every lie he'd told, every dinner he'd claimed was a business meeting, every moment of emotional infidelity had left traces that accumulated like evidence in a case he didn't know was being built against him. Celine knew before she walked in that night, he realized during therapy. She'd known for weeks, maybe months. "I thought I was being clever, but I was just being obvious to everyone except myself." The phone calls that ended when she entered the room, the new cologne he'd started wearing, the way he'd begun working out obsessively, caring about his appearance in ways that had nothing to do with her, the credit card charges for restaurants he'd never taken her to. The emotional distance that had grown between them was like a chasm. "Betrayal leaves fingerprints," Dr. Chen observed, "on your behavior, your priorities, your presence. You can't compartmentalize deception. It bleeds into everything." Cole had thought he could manage the situation, control the narrative, keep his marriage and his affair in separate boxes. But deception was like smoke. It seeped into everything, staining what it touched, leaving an odor that lingered long after the fire was out. The night Celine found them together wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the moment the end became undeniable. The betrayal had been happening in plain sight. She just finally decided to stop pretending not to see it. Of all the lessons the fire had taught, the most profound came not from Cole's failures, but from Celine's grace. In the moment when she could have chosen revenge, when she could have let Kara face the consequences of her choices alone, Celine had chosen compassion instead. She saved the woman who helped destroy her marriage. Cole wrote in what would become his final letter to Celine, "That's the kind of person you are, and that's the kind of person I forgot how to be." The image haunted him, Celine risking her life to save Kara, choosing humanity over hatred, demonstrating the kind of moral courage that no amount of money could buy. It was the ultimate power move, not because it was strategic, but because it was authentic. It showed who Celine really was when everything else burned away. Compassion isn't weakness, Dr. Chen had explained. It's the strongest thing a person can choose, especially when they have every reason to choose otherwise. Cole had spent years accumulating power, financial, social, professional, but he'd never understood real power until he watched his wife save his mistress. Real power was the ability to remain yourself when the world gave you every excuse to become someone smaller, meaner, more vindictive. Celine's compassion had accomplished what his billions never could. It had transformed a moment of destruction into something redemptive. She'd emerged from the fire not as a victim, but as a victor, not because she'd won anything, but because she'd refused to let betrayal change her fundamental nature. That was the woman he'd lost, and that was the lesson he'd carry forever. True strength isn't about what you can take or achieve or accumulate. It's about who you choose to be when everything you thought you wanted turns to ash in your hands. Stories like this one aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors that reflect our own choices, our own relationships, our own moments of moral testing. In Cole and Celine's tragedy, we see the eternal human struggle between ambition and love, between what we want and what we need, between who we are and who we think we should become. The fire that consumed their penthouse was dramatic, cinematic, the kind of ending that makes headlines. But the real fire had been burning much longer. In every moment, Cole chose recognition over relationship. In every dinner he missed for a deal. In every day he forgot that love requires presence, not just presence. We live in a world that celebrates accumulation of wealth, followers, achievements, status symbols. But Celine's story reminds us that the most valuable things can't be bought, stored, or insured. Love, trust, integrity, compassion. These are the treasures that matter, and they require daily investment of our most precious resource, ourselves. The lesson isn't that money is evil or that success is wrong. It's that nothing, no achievement, no acquisition, no amount of external validation, is worth sacrificing the people who love us for who we are, not what we own. Cole learned this too late, but perhaps that's why stories like his matter. They serve as warnings, as guides, as reminders that the choices we make in small moments accumulate into the shape of our lives. Every day, we choose between presence and distraction, between authenticity and performance, between love and everything that masquerades as love but isn't. The fire may have been an accident, but the marriage that burned was destroyed by 1,000 tiny choices, each one seemingly insignificant until they added up to everything. If Celine's strength moved you the way it moved me, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Rich Billionaires Romance Stories. Together, we'll keep telling stories that remind us love is fragile, but hope is stronger. These tales aren't just about the wealthy and powerful, they're about all of us navigating the complicated terrain of human hearts. Your engagement helps me know these stories are reaching people who understand that behind every headline, every scandal, every dramatic ending, there are real lessons about how to love better, choose wiser, and remain true to ourselves when the world offers us every reason to compromise our values. Thank you for being part of this community where stories matter and hearts heal. And so we close the book on Cole and Celine Blackwood, a love story that began with promises, whispered under Manhattan stars, and ended with sirens screaming through the night. Their tale reminds us that some fires start with matches, but others begin with choices. Small, seemingly innocent decisions that accumulate like kindling until one spark sets everything ablaze. Tonight, somewhere in this city of 8 million dreams, Cole sits in his rebuilt penthouse, surrounded by luxury that feels like a beautiful prison. The walls are perfect, the art is priceless, the view is spectacular, but the Silence echoes with the absence of the one person who made it all worthwhile. Success, he learned too late, is meaningless without someone to share it with. Someone who loves you not for what you've built, but for who you are when all the building stops. Meanwhile, Celine writes by her window overlooking Central Park, crafting stories that heal rather than harm, building a life measured not in square footage, but in moments of genuine connection. She chose grace over revenge, compassion over cruelty, and in doing so she discovered something more valuable than any penthouse, the unshakable knowledge that she could trust herself to remain true to her values even when the world gave her every reason to abandon them. Their story isn't unique. In boardrooms and coffee shops, in mansions and apartments, in relationships across this city and beyond, people face the same choice Cole faced. Will you choose presence or performance? Will you invest in love or in the illusion of love? Will you tend the garden of your relationships, or will you let ambition choke out everything that truly matters? The fire that consumed their penthouse lasted only hours, but the neglect that destroyed their marriage took years to build. That's the real tragedy. Not the dramatic ending, but the slow erosion of something beautiful. The gradual replacement of intimacy with image, of connection with conquest. Love, like fire, requires oxygen to survive. Starve it of attention, presence, and genuine care, and it dies just as surely as flames without fuel. But unlike fire, love can be rekindled, if both people are willing to tend it with the devotion it deserves. In the end, fire may destroy homes, but neglect destroys love. Guard your heart, guard your promises, and remember that the most expensive thing you can lose isn't money, property, or status. It's the trust of someone who believed in you when you were still learning to believe in yourself.